Okay. Okay, I'll start my story by saying my name is Bruce Melvin Westphal, BMW, and I was named after my father, Melvin, and I was the fifth of six children, but I would say I got my dad's name because I was born on his birthday, October 19th, and it was the year that my mom never gave my dad a birthday present, so she gave him a little boy instead. So that's how I got to be called Bruce Melvin Westphal. They never knew that it stood for BM, and I carried that onus over my BM Westphal. My dad was always MB Westphal. I was born in the same house that I was raised in, born in bed that it was handed down to me from my parents. I was born in the front bedroom of a house in Wilmer, Minnesota, 620 East 2nd Street. And my mom had two babies born in the hospital previous to me, but didn't like the hospital treatment. And she found the babies she didn't want the baby exposed in the hospital. So I was born at home. So it wasn't too much excitement in my life. I was born in the same house I was raised in. Yeah, I think the outstanding event of my life, the near-death experience I had, was when I don't remember it. It was in December of the 1939. I was only 2 months old. I've read about it in my dad's letters to his brothers and sisters that I had whooping cough. And the whooping cough just about killed me. And I quit breathing, got blue, didn't get oxygen. They called the fire department to resuscitate me, but by the time they got there, I'd already started breathing. I think my dad tipped me upside down under the sink and ran cold water over me to getting me to breathe. I don't know where he learned how to do that. But my dad also had some training in the hospital because he was in World War I. And he almost died from the flu epidemic of 1918. He always wanted to be a doctor after that, but he never had a chance. So I could imagine my dad doing something like that to get me breathing again. So I lived. He wrote in a letter to his brothers and sisters that I recently just read. He said, we just about lost Bruce yesterday to whooping cough. So my mother kind of made a bargain, I think, with the God at that point, that if I had made it through, she'd make sure that I did something special. I think she thought I was called to the ministry because I was spared. I always kind of fought that. I didn't like the idea that I would be determined by something I had no control over, saying that, like the book of Samuel. Samuel got called into the ministry because his mother bargained a deal and sent him off to be a priest somewhere. I know I always kind of fought that idea, but I eventually did kind of surrender to it. And by the second year of college, I decided to become a pastor. It was kind of fun. Back in my mind, I always thought I would be a pastor. Another story from my early childhood I discovered is that when I was born, my mother had been caring for the infant child of her cousin whose mother had died in childbirth. Her name was Patty Thorson. She was 1 year older than me exactly. She was also born on October 19th, 1938. So when her mother died, my mother took her in and raised her as an infant from birth for a whole year. But then when I came along, she was... Her dad took her back again. My mother said she couldn't manage two of them, so I always felt, when I learned about that, I felt kind of guilty because I kind of kicked her out of our house. And she went to school 1 year ahead of me. I wouldn't even call her a first cousin. There was one first cousin once removed or something like that. But I still know her. She's still alive to this day.
When did you learn about this?
I learned it later in life. It's kind of a complex story. I'd heard about it. My mother never told me about it, but I heard it from Patty Thorson. She told me that my mother raised her. We ended up living across the lake from her brother. Grannis's, her brother-in-law. And so we ended up talking one time, and that's where I heard the story. The story was never really shared around. I don't know why. But those a depression, into the depression years, and things were tough. So there's some drama around that. And I think my older sister, Carolyn, who never felt like she liked me. She always was kind of brushed me off, rather brusque, never showed much affection towards me. She was kind of mad at my coming into the world. I never could quite understand about that, but I think she might have bonded with that little baby. And I came and took that little baby's place, and she was only like 4 years old, so I wouldn't understand. So I always couldn't understand. Bootz felt the same way, because Carolyn didn't like Bootz either because she was married to me. I think she just had a little chip on her shoulder. I was wondering what that was about. And I don't know if she could really understand it either. Yeah, we were quite far apart. My sister is 4 years older than me. My brother was like 10 years older than me. Then my next, like, they were spaced out quite a ways. Then the two oldest ones were even like 15 years older than me. My oldest brother went into World War II in 1944, and I was only 5 years old. I can't even remember him being around the house. I remember him coming home from the Navy. That was exciting when he came home. Then I had another brother. My littlest brother, Craig, 5 years younger than me by almost exactly. I remember being lonely as a kid because the sister really wasn't that nice to me. I wanted a companion. I remember asking my brother, asking God in my prayers to give me a baby brother. And at the end of every prayers at night, I would say, "Please God, give me a baby brother." And then one time, I think my mother said, "Well, God may just answer your prayers." And I think he was a whoops child, but anyway, he was born. He became my really, really pet. I really loved Craig. We shared the bed together growing up. We're friends all the way through until he died. I miss him a lot now. He died from cancer when he was 66 years old, or 65, I think. I miss him a lot. Craig was somebody who I looked after even when he died, because he never married. He was the unmarried kid in the family. So that's the family I grew up in. Very close-knit neighborhood in Wilmer. It was a house on 2nd Street East. Neighbors next door became my best friends, Carlson boys. Neighbors across the street, Jimmy Quinn. We had all sorts of excitement. He was the one who burned the Davis's barn down from a fire that they had. Started it on fire and got out of control. The whole barn burned to the ground. That was excitement in the neighborhood that was right behind our house.
When was that?
That was, I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, because Maury, my next older brother, was about 15, and he was supposed to be tending the fire. The kids were horsing around with the fire. I still remember Jimmy Quinn dropping it. It went in between the slots of the studs of a barn that had been kicked in and went down. No one could get the fire out before they could turn the thing out. The thing had just kind of swooshed up the chimney, and the fire department came. It was a big event. That was probably the most exciting event of the neighborhood. We went to Lincoln School. It was on the east side. Started kindergarten when I was 4 years old. Went to Lincoln School until I was in 6th grade. We went because the schools were crowded. After the war, the babies were coming, and so they pushed some of us into the high school a little sooner. So 6th grade, I went to high school in junior high school. We make room in the schools after World War II. It was just called Wilmer High School. But they started 6th graders in there because the Depression, there was really a drop in the number of kids. Then after the war, the baby boomers came, and so there weren't many in my class. There were, but the classes subsequently started getting bigger and bigger. So we started up the main high school when we were in 6th grade. I walked to school every day. I walked home for lunch every day. Walked back for the afternoon class. Walked home at the night after school. I had a paper route since I was 4th grade. I remember I started delivering papers. Always had a job, always had some money. Delivered Minneapolis Star Tribune. Delivered the evening paper, which was the Minneapolis Star, and delivered the morning paper with Minneapolis Tribune later, and all the way through high school, because I could do that before I went to school. Delivered the Wilmer Daily, West Central Daily Tribune, it was called. I did that. So I always had a paper route. We had lots of fun. I was a kid who liked to do things. I had chemistry set. Used to do chemical experiments in the basement and blow things up. But Craig was my foil. I would, what do I say?
You're Watson.
Yeah. I used to let him do the blowing up. We had lots of fun. We made carts. We chased around the neighborhood with push carts and homemade ones. Craig was the driver. I'd always push him. My dad worked on the railroad. I said earlier he was in World War I, and his dad was a pastor, but his mother died when he was only 18 years old. She died up in Canada in 1914 from diphtheria, and his sister died at the same time, and then within a few months another sister died from appendicitis. They were pioneers. They were busting new land, homesteading the land up in Alberta, and my grandfather was a pastor up there. And when he lost his family, his wife and 2 kids, he ended up marrying another woman who never was accepted by my dad, and I think his other brothers too. So they kind of wandered around footloose and fancy free up there. Then World War I came along, and he joined up the United States Marines and went on a big adventure to France. So the family I saw my dad kind of roaming around. He ended up in Wilmer one time and met my mom, who was born and raised in Wilmer. He hadn't moved more than a few blocks from where she was born. And my dad got a job in the Great Northern Railroad, which was, at that point, a union job. And he worked on the Great Northern Railroad for over 40 years. He said he warned us kids never to work for a job you don't like. He says, I did, and I regretted it all my life, so never work a job you don't like. But I think it was through the Depression years and the war years. Didn't have a lot of choice. My dad always had a steady income, pretty good. Railroad paid good salary in Wilmer. But he always wanted to do something else. He told me he wanted to be a medical doctor. Never got a chance to. So my mother taught country school. In high school, she studied to be a teacher, and then they had normal training. I guess you could go and get a teacher's license without ever having to go to college. Your mom did the same thing. So she was a school teacher when my dad met her. She was kind of a dapper gal, owned her own Model A Ford, drove it around, bought a brand new one, and she, really good looking woman. My dad picked out a good looker, and she was sweet as could be, loved us kids so much. I don't think anyone that didn't like my mom. And she was very nice. My dad was very loyal to her. So they provided a good home. We had 6 kids total in the family. That's a big family. And we lived in a house with 3 bedrooms. I shared a bedroom with. We had 4 boys in one bedroom, but like I say, my oldest brother was headed off for World War II before I can really remember that. And then my next brother, Maury, headed off for the Korean War. So we weren't all around at the same time. We were spread out. It didn't feel so crowded. Craig and I were kind of the cabooses of the family. Kind of had a totally different experience growing up than my older siblings. Craig and I feel like we were kind of allowed to just do whatever we want. Parents never paid a lot of attention to us. I think they were kind of tired out. My mom decided to go into teaching. She was not teaching when I grew up. I was a little kid, not with my older siblings either. But she was trying to get other older kids money to go to college, and so she went to work. So Craig and I kind of were left to fend for ourselves. I kind of looked after him. My mom taught school. I would cook his lunches, and I would see to it he got dressed to go to school. I was kind of his mentor and looked after him. Kept him from getting beat up by the other kids in the neighborhood, so to speak. But we had a lot of kids. It was a good neighborhood. It was a lot of kids. We were very loyal to the church. We grew up in the Norwegian Lutheran Church. My parents were both fluent in Norwegian when they were born, but they never taught us kids Norwegian. I was one regret that I have, that they could have easily taught us Norwegian. They talked Norwegian when they didn't want us to understand what they were talking about. So the church was very important in the life of our family. It was very cultural, very Norwegian.
Were the services in Norwegian?
Not when I was there, but it was originally. I remember them telling a story when they switched over to speaking English. I think their big effort back then was to not speak the native language, but to speak English for the sake of your kids. So I never learned Norwegian, and when I was in church, you could see some of the signs around there were in Norwegian, but it was definitely English speaking.
What's the story of how your family came to America?
I think we found that out by going to Norway later on and finding out where they came from. Remember that when we went there? Yeah. It was poverty. They were poor, and they looking for opportunity. I think they saw America as a dream opportunity. Norway had limited amount of land. I think my grandfather Ole and my grandmother Lena, believe it or not, Ole and Lena, they came over separately, but they met here in Wilmer as young adults, I don't know how old they were when they met, but they were not too far from each other in Norway. I think they both came through Flikkafjord, one on one side of Lake Sear, the other one on the other side. Then my grandfather was a pastor. He was born in Denmark, and he ended up coming over here and marrying a gal who was born in Norway, born in what's the name of Saltdalen Bud, up that northern area of Norway. She was actually, I found out, born here in about 1860 something. One of the first white children born in the Chaska area. Her father was a builder. She was pretty classy. Her father was quite well-to-do, and my grandfather was well educated then too. He had gone to Red Wing Seminary, and they're very cultured, I think, raising their kids that way. So he preached in Norwegian, I know, and he could preach in Danish, Norwegian, either one. Born there, but I think he kind of adopted the Norwegians. So I never talked too much about Danish heritage. I found out later on that his father, Daniel, who he came over to America with when he was a young kid, was actually born in Germany. And some interesting things there. We all thought we were part German, but we did our DNA analysis. We don't have any German in us at all. So we are left to wonder who Daniel was. Daniel Joachim Westphal. That's who we all saw was German. I said he could very well have been Jewish for a while, we know. He ended up being a worker up in they call it the Kartoffeltiskers in Norway, up in Denmark. And he ended up getting the local girl on the Herregård there pregnant. That was how my grandfather was conceived and born. So there's a little story there. That side of the family and my mother's side of the family, one was spread all over the city, all over the country. The other one was very close-knit, close in Wilmer. So we had the conflicts. I think the two families were really much different, my mother's family and my father's family. I grew up mostly connected to my mother's family in Wilmer.
Great. Grandma, do you want to talk about when you were born, where you were born, and what year, and what your birthday is, and who are your parents and your brother, your sisters?
It turns out that I was the last one born to my parents, and that my dad was born on the same birth date as I was, so that was pretty special for me.
Wait, he said the same thing.
Yep.
And for him too.
Yeah, we were destined for each other.
Yes.
Both born on our father's birthday. And both born in unusual circumstances. She was not born in the hospital either.
No.
Where were you born?
January 25th, 1940.
And where?
And it was in Alexandria at a, what do you call a lady that?
Midwife.
Midwife in her house.
She happened to be there because it was January blizzard. They lived in a farm and they didn't want to be stuck on the farm giving birth to a newborn. So she went to town because the midwife wouldn't be able to get out there. Yeah, you got to tell the circumstances when you came into the world. Your mom was sitting in a rocking chair.
Yeah. So my dad had gotten her mom into Alexandria, and I was about to deliver, and it was in the Alexandria area, and I was at the midwife place when I was born, and the midwife said to the family, she's making a terrible face and looks like she's going to have a baby, and that's what happened.
Sitting up in a rocking chair, they caught her.
Sitting up in a rocking chair.
Wow.
And so they were all alarmed, and everything was perfect, and I looked perfect, and I was cute and safe. I didn't struggle to live, and my dad was proud of everything.
Your mother said Beryl was born in a hurry, and she's been in a hurry ever since. The theme of her life.
Yep.
Beryl is an interesting name. Where did your mother find the name Beryl?
My mom is sort of a literate person, and it was actually a name of a...
Bob Beryl Markham.
Yeah. So...
kind of a scoundrel, rascal woman.
Yeah. Where did you grow up? What town?
On a farm outside of I was fine and healthy, and I was the last of the 3 women.
Sixth grade.
Yeah, I started in
There.
high school and I went straight through 12th grade on the old high school of Wilmer, and it was really old. Big, they tore it all down now. Built 2 new high schools since I've been there, so this was the old Wilmer High School. And it was wonderful. I mean, I thought it was a great school. Like, I so close to my classmates. We had 190 students in my class, graduating class. And after 8th grade into 9th grade, we got a big influx of country kids. So from around the city, Wilmer, up till then, it was just Wilmer kids. And then we would add people from Pennock and Candioti and Svea and surrounding communities. Spicer, Wilmer was the drew people in. So we had quite a big high school. We had good teachers, good math and science. I felt well prepared for college. My classmates said the same thing. I tended to be on the nerd side. I was not a jock, I was a nerd. I didn't know a word nerd back then, but I was a nerd. My friends were nerds. They were all the ones that ended up getting PhDs and doctors, practicing lawyers and professors. That's who I ended up knowing and associating with. We were kind of the smart guys. Didn't know it at the time, but...
Did you have any girlfriends?
No, I had crushes. I went with one girl to the prom. Her name was Vernell, and I met her at our class reunion, and I was so impressed. She was the best looking person of the class, and she was kind of a late bloomer, obviously, and she still is a pretty sharp looking woman. I never did date.
Were you in any activities in school?
I was in the choir, singing in the Wilmer High School choir. I did play athletics in the neighborhood. We had park programs and that kind of stuff. I never played on the varsity team. Wilmer had some really good athletes, and like several of my classmates ended up playing in colleges. They had, football players weighed 300 pounds and I weighed about 115. And I didn't even finish growing until I was 21 years old. I was only about 5'7" or 8, I think. When I got married, I was about 5'7". I ended up being 5'9". I grew a couple inches after we got married. So I matured physically later. But I enjoyed my high school classmates, and still to this day we are close. I mean, I keep in touch through Facebook, and we have our reunions. We love reunions because our whole bunch gets together, and we have a common mind mostly. So I have made good friends for life from high school. Some even from the grade school, even some. So my high school is kind of unremarkable, I'd say. I graduated from high school. I had a summer job that year working on the railroad, which was fortunate because I get unions wages. I made good money that summer. And I worked with my dad, which was kind of fun. We worked on the repair tracks.
What year was this?
1957. Headed off to Augsburg College. My roommate was David Peterson, who was my friend from young as I can remember. We're still friends to this day. And then we had Lloyd Bakke, the third person in the room, and we remained friends to this day. We liked each other so well that we kept being roommates all the way through until I was a senior. We got moved out of the dormitory. So we had to move off the campus. Yeah, that's what it was. Anyway, I like my roommates. I didn't know what I started off, I was going to be pre-med. I studied chemistry, mathematics. Pre-med, my advisor was the anatomy professor. So I was on track for that. And for 2 years, I was not so impressed with the chemistry department. I wasn't that great of a natural chemist. We had terrible chemistry teachers, new ones every year. And after my sophomore year, I was leaning towards the seminary because I was more impressed with the professors, and it seemed to be much more stimulating and more exciting, a stronger department. In that spring of 1959, with me, 1959, which is we're coming up on, it was 61 years ago now, I met Bootz. And believe it or not, my chemistry professor introduced us to each other. So my second year, I was a chemistry lab person, and I worked in the chemistry department with Lyle Hall, who doubled as the dorm resident guy. He ended up coming up to me when I was in the dormitory. We were kind of emptying out for the summer. Everybody had to empty out the dorm. And he said he'd met some student nurses from Fairview. They wanted to get together and have a picnic, he said. He needed to get some guys lined up. He says, and they're across the street at Murphy Square. And the two of them are over there right now. And they're wanting to talk to some of the boys over here in the dorm. So here was an opportunity. The girls at Augsburg are all leaving, and so we were looking for girls that were going to stay around, the student nurses stay around. So I found another guy, walked across the street, and there was Beryl Titus and B. Sunda, two cutest can be, just finishing first year student nursing. And I said I'd go back, get a bunch of other guys to go, so we were going to get cars, and not everybody had a car. I didn't have a car. We were going on a picnic somewhere. So I went back to the dorm and I rounded up about 10, 12 other, because I said, you want to see what they look like? Go across the street. There's a couple of them over there now. They're good-looking girls. So we ended up going. We had a big blast between Augsburg dormitory and the student nurses from Fairview. First time we'd ever had an arrangement like that. So they were on the prowl looking for boys, and we were looking for girls. So, and lo and behold, Bootz Titus, the cutest one of the bunch, was the one that I ended up spending the rest of my life with. I couldn't say I fell in love with her immediately, but I sure fell in love with her looks. She was friendly and beautiful. So that's the story. We had a wonderful time. So that summer, I actually went back home, got a car. My dad had found an old Chevy, 50 Chevy, and I drove out there, and Bootz went with me out to pick up that car. And my mother, when she met her, I drove to Wilmer, and then I told my mother we were going to drive the car up to Alexandria to give her a ride home. My mother warned me, she says, beware of those girls, all they want is a ride home. And lo and behold, she kind of fell in love with Bootz too eventually. As soon as she found out we were an item. So I took a couple of my friends, my cousin Jimmy Salverson and Kenny Carlson. They drove my new 50 Chevy up there, and Bootz and I laid in the back seat, sleeping, making out. That's how we drove up to Carlos, dropped her off, and came back home to Wilmer, and I went back up to get her again on Sunday to give her a ride back. And that was, I think, when my mother got a little concerned that I was giving her too much of my time and free rides back and forth or something, I don't know. But that's how we met. It was a big turning point in our life. That summer I had a job. It was my brother Calvin in the concrete business. And I got high pay in those jobs too. I got another union paying job. And we ended up moving in a house off campus on Harriet Avenue South
Okay.
with Dragamiller and Thompson and Berger. A bunch of us, we rented the downstairs of a house of a woman who lived upstairs. An older lady kind of looked after us.
Okay.
So I worked in the concrete business. That's a heavy job. Shoveling, wheeling wheelbarrows full of cement, get you in shape. I think it's good when you're young to do physical work. And you make good money too. My brother Craig always said, when you get that paycheck, you can look the banker in the eye and know you earned every penny of it. Following up on that picnic with the Augsburg guys and the Fairview girls, a few days later, I walked by my dorm mate, who was David Begley, and he said, "Hey, Westphal just walked by me," and she said, "I'm talking to Bootz Titus." He said, "She wants to talk to you." So I went over the phone. We had one phone for the whole dormitory on wing, the Delta Hall. We had, like, you can't talk on the phone. It was everybody, public phone almost. Everybody could know who you were talking to in there. Anyway, so I ended up talking to Bootz, and that's where we lined up this date. And then B. Sunda and Bootz, the same two that we met in the park, we decided to go on a date. And I borrowed a car, and we ended up, as before I got my car from going to Wilmer. And I hadn't made my mind whether I would pair off with Bootz or with B. Sunda. And the biggest decision of my life was walking down the sidewalk from the dormitory to the car, asking Bootz to sit in the front seat. I was deciding, should I go with B. Sunda or with Bootz? It was the most important decision of my life. And I picked her because I thought she had the cutest butt. That's what I told her. Anyway, I'm glad I didn't marry B. Sunda. Hope she doesn't ever hear this. But she's a sweet little person. So that's how we met, and we dated all that summer. We had lots of fun. And you also said you wanted to talk some about when I was in college. I was active in the Young Republicans. I grew up in the home that I think we were more Republican than Democrats. But anyway, it was the era of Eisenhower as president, and we had Republican Walter Judd, who was the congressman, and Republicans, Youngdahl was a governor. We had some good people in government. Republicans were good back then, in my estimation. So I actually was vice president of the Young Republicans, and I ended up becoming the organizer of the Young Republican Convention for the college campus Republicans. So I was very active in the Republican Party when I was in college, and ended up becoming a Democrat only after the Vietnam War started. That's kind of where I switched over. And I became convinced that the Republicans were just downright not fair in their politics. I did not like Goldwater Republicans. I did not like the behaviors of campaigns where they used dirty tricks. I just thought I saw more of that among the Republicans than I ever saw among Democrats. So I became a Democrat, and I became an anti-war Democrat, and I became very involved all the way through my whole life in that respect. Okay, so I graduated from college and went to seminary, so I switched my major from chemistry to pre-seminary after my sophomore year. So Bootz knew that we started dating, that I was going to be a pastor. She didn't know what she was getting into, but she became a wonderful pastor's wife. She was a good support for me all along. And marrying a nurse is the best thing you could ever marry, because they always make good money and they can get a job anywhere if they need to work. Besides, they take care of all your sores and problems at home too. I graduated from college in 1961. On June 3rd, and I got married on June 10th. We got engaged before Bootz was done with school. I finished 1 week before I got married, and Bootz graduated that August. And then we went to seminary. We lived across the street from Augsburg and Fairview, right at 2314 South 7th Street is where we lived, which is now, was like Riverside Avenue then, which is now probably part of a huge parking ramp or something over there. So she worked in labor delivery as a nurse from 3 to 11, and I was in seminary during the day, and we went through 3 years of seminary, and she supported me. Dan was born 1962. That was a big event in our life. When Dan was born, it changed us, matured us. As you know, Dan's born with some birth anomalies. He was born with only one leg and an open abdomen, which was called an omphalocele, so she needed to have major surgery done immediately upon birth. It was very upsetting to everybody because he was born in the same delivery room that Bootz was a nurse in, and all our friends were there. And so everybody knew her and knew us, and they were right there to help us. Dan was 2 weeks in the hospital before he could come home. So Bootz came home without him. Well, we worried. Of course we worried he was not going to make it. We had a pastor who I'd interned with, John Steen, came down and baptized him that same night because he had surgery. We didn't know all that was wrong with him, but Dan, strong as can be, got through surgery perfectly and went home, and we grew. Dan, nothing, you know Dan, there's not much wrong with him except he's so darn stubborn. I think that's part of why he was so strong to make it through. Dan, very determined. And he would just blossomed all the way through all the troubles he's had and all the hospitalizations, which you can imagine. We had an insurance policy that only paid $160 for birth, and there was a fine clause back then that said it would not pay for any birth defects. The bill that we received to take him home after 2 weeks was $15,000, and back then that was huge. That would be like maybe $150,000 today, and they would not discharge him unless we paid the bill. And I remember saying to them, "Well, how are you going to have that happen? I don't have $15,000, and I'm not going to have it tomorrow either." It's gonna either the longer you keep me, your bill goes up. You're going to run the bill up. So we took him home, and we became what you would call medically indigent. That was the word I remember they used, which is a euphemism for welfare. We went on medical welfare. We went to Gillette Hospital. State of Minnesota paid all our expenses.
How old are you when this is happening?
I was 22. So were you, Bootz? We were both 22. Dan was born September 62, and I would have been 23 that October. Wow. And Mom was a couple of months ago. We were young.
That's really young.
And we'd only finished the first year of seminary. Yeah. So we had Dan over at Gillette working at Fairview for Mom. I was a student. We grew up in a hurry. Yeah. I became radicalized around the healthcare thing. I see the injustice of healthcare. The whole American healthcare system stunk to high heaven, and back then as much as it does now. Insurance companies ripped you off. And when you needed insurance, they weren't there for you. They expected the state to pay for it. Thank God for Gillette Hospital. Thank God for the state of Minnesota. They paid the whole way through for Dan.
What kind of support did you get from your parents during this time?
I think at this point, they were stunned. They were probably more psychologically unable to handle it than we were. I don't see them as strengths for us at that point. A lot of people, the strongest person I found for support was Vani. We lived, they lived around here.
Yeah, who's Bonnie?
Calvin and Vani. Vani was the strongest person that helped us. Others, I felt they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. I found I was kind of angry about what happened, blaming God. I think theologically I really said, why would God, who you pray to for good things and for a healthy baby, not give a child a chance? I said, if there's some purpose in this thing, I would like to know what it is. I said, all I can consider is that God is either too weak to do anything or just vindictive and mad. And I don't like either God. I don't like a weak God. I don't like an angry God. I said, God is useless. You don't need to pray to God. So I kind of quit praying to God. So I had a fight with God. And then here I was in seminary. So it affected my whole outlook theologically as I went through seminary too. I think my struggle with God kind of continues on, saying that I resolved it finally when I came to see that God did not will for this to happen, and that God knows what our suffering is. Like God had his own son who suffered and died, and God understands the loss of a child. The irony of this was that I said Bootz was a nurse in the OBGYN department, and Dan was a patient there. And eventually the administrator of the hospital, Carl Plato, ended up marrying my cousin. So a lot of the players we encountered over time too. I mean, I think a lot of people didn't know how to handle it. I guess you can't blame anybody for not being sensitive or not knowing what to say, because it was hard to be helpful. The other people who really emerged as helpful was Eileen Cole, who was shared the duplex that we lived in across the street. She was a professor of speech at Augsburg, and she had kind words for us. She was there with Dan, watched him sometimes for us. There were a lot of people who were very helpful to us. I think some of my other professors too, like Paul Sonak. Those people who were sometimes the most able to help. But Bootz and I had each other, and we had Dan, and Dan turned out to be one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Continued from the time he was a little kid till now. He's an interesting person. Everybody here knows Dan.
Yeah.
So I stuck with seminary. I thought about quitting because I kind of lost faith and certainly lost confidence in prayer. I had a naive view of prayer, and I think I've matured it. And I said the whole notion of God as being a friend instead of some power that was either weak or mean. God struggles alongside of us and suffers along with us. God's a good friend. Jesus, you could say, is a good friend. Understands human conditions and human existence. So I think I became a better theologian. I became a better chaplain. I think I became a better pastor. I think I became a better person. And we had a stronger marriage. It was not easy. I think I learned since that one of the most difficult things for a marriage is to have a child with health problems, puts extreme stress on a marriage, because each person experiences the encounter. Even worse would be to lose a child. Each person experiences the pain individually, and it changes you as a person. So you have to change and have a different kind of relationship between you and your spouse. It changed both of us. Fortunately, we still matured, and I remember when the next child we expected Suanne to be born, my prayer to God was, I just dare you, God, to give us a child that has birth problems, birth defects. I dare you. I still had God in my life, but boy, I was angry. And Suanne was born with perfect health. And then Scott came along, and then Jill came along. We had 3 healthy children. The science was not any different. It was not anything. Dan's birth defects had really nothing to do with genetics, had nothing to do with some preventable or some expectable cause. Nobody could give an answer for it. There was something in the development of the fetus could have happened. We don't know. There's no answer to it.
Mom, she was a nurse
Could have
doing
been
X-rays during
Could
that
have been
time?
something there. Could have been. She wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I think we learned
Wasn't thalidomide. She wasn't taking.
there was no thalidomide, nothing like that. So we don't know. It's this question you don't have. The question of why is a wasted question. I think mostly when it comes to suffering, asking why is a waste of time. You just accept it and move on and keep trusting. So it affected us. It strengthened me. We were at age 22, 23 years old. I ended up being involved in the Foundation for Healthcare Evaluation when we were starting to look at HMOs and the reimbursements. My whole attitudes about healthcare. I was one of 2 consumer advocates on the whole foundation board. I remember Gillette Hospital taking Dan out of. We both took Dan out against medical advice. We had to go before the whole board committee to get him back in again. I said, you do not own this child. This child is ours. We decide when he comes to the hospital, when he comes back here. And we're not going against medical advice. We're going against your policies, which are not medical advice. And they changed their policies because they would not let us visit him more than 2 hours on a weekend. And all week long, we couldn't go see him. And they changed the policy after that. I think Dan caused us to be stronger in confronting the powers that be. We wrote letters to the governor. We wrote letters to Congressman Martin Sable was a friend of ours. Going back to Augsburg in the Democrat-Republican thing, he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Minnesota. He was helpful for us in changing the rules over at Gillette Hospital too. We saw things happen when we got organized and got to the right people. I still think the whole insurance business is a ripoff. Health insurance is they're making money off sick people is something that is immoral. The way the whole healthcare system works. I think healthcare is a right. I'm way ahead of Bernie Sanders on that one. Like we ran for state senate back in 1972. It was a big issue for us. I think we, although the Vietnam War led us to run, but I think the healthcare issue was the same one. We still have not resolved it. I think now with this COVID thing, we see the inadequacy of the healthcare system, such as we have a for-profit, insurance-driven healthcare system, is inadequate to deal with the COVID thing. They're dysfunctional. They don't know how to do it.
Going back to Dan, how many surgeries did he have? How often was he in the hospital?
He had at least 10 surgeries. I could add them up. Depends on different. Some of them very serious ones, like spinal fusions and some amputations, some abdominal closures. Some were not so serious. Some were like fixing up scar tissue from previous surgeries, because we went through a lot of things. I think we count them up 12. How many times surgeries? 12, 13 of them. So out of the first 5 years of his life, he spent about 3 of those 5 years over at Gillette. He kept him year round. He went his first year of school, went over there. So we got him back in a public school. That was a big fight too, that they did not want to take him over at Pillsbury public schools. They wanted him to go to Michael Dowling School and then be transported. And I said, no, if he's going to make it, he's going to make it at a regular school. And he went to Pillsbury School with steps all over the place. And we got kids stepping up. Our next door neighbor, Sexton, Jill Sexton, she was a great asset to Dan starting there at first grade. We had Dan, we lived out in Arden Hills when he was born, and then but we moved down to Northeast when he was to start school. And we skipped kindergarten because I figured kindergarten is not what Dan needed. He had plenty of socializing with other kids over at Gillette. So we started off with first grade when the first grade teacher over at Pillsbury volunteered to tutor him. So every night after school she'd come over and spend an hour and a half with Dan teaching him to read. You kids all got in on that. So she was very, very stern, wasn't she? And all business. Dan behaved himself. He never got held back in school at all. He had good teachers. And then as soon as he could get up and walk, after this cast was removed, he was walking on the crutches. He'd walk this 3 blocks over to Pillsbury School. He'd come home at lunchtime again. Dan never asked for any extra help, but other people stepped up to help. We got a lot of Dan stories. You could make a tape that goes on here for 4 hours just talking about Dan. Yeah. But that's a big part of our life. Yeah. These are things that shape us. Yeah. And shape us in terms of healthcare and politics, religion, theology, make us who we are. I think we came out of it stronger people. Like I said, we got no answers to the questions about why or what to do. I think it was kind of shown to us how we do it, and it would unfold for you as you take your steps ahead. Walk by faith, not by sight, so the glory belongs to God. I learned some things. I think it made me, as I said, overall, I wouldn't will it on anybody, but I think tough times makes you stronger. If things don't kill you, they make you stronger. Something like that. Right. If it doesn't, if you don't die from it, you're going to be a stronger person. Yeah. And to live with that freedom. Yeah. It liberates you. It is. Well, Mom was a nurse in nurses training, so I knew what her career trajectory was. But she had a trajectory that she wanted to graduate and then tour the world and be an adventurous. She had plans to travel with her roommate, Bisunda, who was the person she was with when I met her. They were going to do some exciting travels and be nurses in other countries. And then she met me and she decided to get married. Mm-hmm. So I kind of ruined that for her. But we had many adventures making up for it later on. Right? Yep.
Yes.
And I was not planning on being a pastor quite when I met her. I wanted to be pre-med, and I was a chemistry major, and I was heading that direction. But it was the summer that I met you that I decided to switch over. So when I went back to school for my junior year, I switched to pre-sem and quit taking chemistry and started taking things like Greek and more social things like history, sociology, those are kinds of subjects. And I enjoyed them. I don't regret being a pastor. I told Mom many times I couldn't think of a profession in which you could do so many lateral things still being in the ministry. I've been a teacher and I've been counselor, I've been a chaplain, I've been a preacher, organizer, all those things, and we always have been under the umbrella of being a pastor. So I thought it was a wonderful profession to be in. Our first assignment, they wanted us somewhat close to Gillette Hospital because that's where Dan was. We wanted something close to Gillette. So we got as close as we could get because Twin City was hard to get the first call. So we went to Austin. And we got Grace Lutheran Church in Austin. And then we had 2 babies born in Austin. That's where Scott, well, first of all, Sue Ann, and then Scott was born. So that was a very productive 2.5 years there. And then we moved from there up to Arden Hills, when I got a call to Holy Triune in northeast Minneapolis, which is a merger of 3 inner-city congregations. St. Petri, Emmanuel, Concordia became Holy Triune. And we lived in Arden Hills because we couldn't find a house in northeast Minneapolis to buy. We went and saw all 3 of them in the whole city that were for sale. It was a tough time to buy a house. And we finally found a house up by Vonnie and Calvin up in Arden Hills, thanks to Vonnie. And we were there for about 1.5 years, and then we went driving. One Monday morning, we happened to be driving down northeast back where Holy Triune was. We saw a for sale sign, an open house sign on a house. And we went up and knocked on the door and said, "Is the open house still on?" And she says, "Oh, it was for yesterday, but we haven't taken the sign down. But if you want to come in and look, you can." So we went in, and the owners were there, and it was really fun. Bootz fell in love with 1416 23rd Avenue Northeast. That was in 1967, 68.
I think you were pregnant. Mom was pregnant with me then.
Yeah. Scott was a little baby. Scott was born in 66.
Yeah.
In Austin.
68.
And he was learning to walk. So it was 67 or 68. I can't remember exactly. And I remember because we went there, one of the first things, Scott was up taking a nap, and then everything was nice and quiet, and pretty soon doorbell rang, and she comes up. There's a lady at the door. She says, "Is this little guy yours?" And there was your Scott. He was about 18 months old. She says, "I found him up on Johnson Street in front of a bus."
Wow.
She was humiliated. So that's how we got introduced to the neighborhood. And Mom had her hands full with 3 babies, plus one on the way. That was Jill. Jill was born in 1968. She was born at North Memorial Hospital. We had 2 in Austin, 1 in Fairview downtown for Dan, and then North Memorial for Jill. And that was it. We decided to not have any more babies. We were going to not have any more babies before Jill came, and that we had actually looked into adopting and actually taken quite a serious step and been interviewed and looked at babies to adopt. We thought we would adopt someone who didn't have a parent. But then in the process, we found out we were pregnant. So here comes Jill. Jill was meant to be here by the good Lord. So that we got 4 babies, then we decided not to have any more, and we had a tubal ligation, which was a good thing for Bootz. We were wondering, they thought we were awfully young. We weren't even 30 years old, and that was a big deal back then. We had to go before an ethics committee at the hospital to do that. They said, even if one of us died, we didn't want any more babies. Especially Mom.
Yeah, he's done.
But that was good. We had 4 wonderful children. That was during the Vietnam War and during the whole very social upheaval of the country and the draft. 1968 was a tumultuous year.
Was Mom working during that time?
She was working when we, at Arden Hills, she started working at Presbyterian Homes. She was the first RN that Presbyterian Homes had, just walked down the street, which now is one of the biggest nursing homes in the state, spread all over the place. She was the first. She went over there and did their meds so they could be certified to have an RN overseeing it. And she was on call if they needed a nurse. So it was not more than a few hours a week.
Manageable. Looks little kids?
Yep, she managed it. Thanks to Bonnie and Calvin, who lived near us, we could drop our kids off there, or they'd come over to watch them. We had a fun time being close to Bonnie and Calvin, those 5 girls. They loved getting together with our bunch, and our bunch loved them. So then in 1969, I got disillusioned with the Vietnam War and disillusioned with churches in action and dealing with what I thought was an immoral war. I also was upset with what was happening racially. We were involved with the Northeast Human Relations Council trying to integrate Northeast Minneapolis. I became president of the Northeast Minneapolis Human Relations Committee or Council and got very involved in that Northeast, which was pretty far out because there were no blacks in the Northeast. But we discovered a few. We discovered one family, the Howell family. Richard Howell was the same age as you guys about. And a couple other, his mom and his dad, they lived in Pierce Street next to when Eureka lived up there. And so we befriended them. Interestingly, Richard Howell ended up moving on to becoming a bishop in the African American church in North Minneapolis, and still there to this day. Became someone I was able to support along the way. And then in 1969, I applied for graduate school because I was kind of tired of the church not responding, and I was looking to become better equipped to do some other kinds of things, pursue another route. I wasn't sure what it would be. So I applied for the Ministry and Social Change program for the Twin Cities Seminaries. Bill Hume was the guy that put that program together. There was another tumultuous year before 68, 69. So that was the year that we were assigned to 2 clinical sites. One was Pilgrim Baptist, the largest historic predominantly black congregation. I should say predominantly because the only white people there were my own family plus the organist.
What year was that?
1969 and 70. And 732 West Central in St. Paul, in the black neighborhood of St. Paul, that survived after the freeway cut through the middle of it. And then I was at I was at West Side neighborhood house in West St. Paul, a Hispanic community, and I wrote my graduate thesis on the church's role in meeting people's need for housing. So I was assigned to these 2 places that were both sponsoring low-income housing. Mom was working hard at home, holding the fort. We had little kids. We didn't have a lot of money, but I got a stipend for graduate school.
So, Mom, you weren't working at that time? You were home full-time with the kids? Yeah.
You worked at the Union Home. She walked up there, too. That was 1 block north. She provided the RN services for them.
What year did you start working there?
As soon as we moved down there. I think 1968.
Okay. So
she was kind of on call.
Okay.
I guess that would be... You were on call, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And she'd go up there and arrange and organize and oversee the distribution of everybody's meds. So that was kind of nice. She'd stay at home and go work flexible hours. So 69 and 70. And then I was about ready at that point to do something radical, like, I don't know what, maybe go to more graduate school or get involved in community organizing, or it was an upheaval time. A lot of protesting of the draft and anti-war activity. I became pretty outspoken in organizing and marching. We went to Washington D.C. in the moratorium and marched there. That was fun.
What year?
1970 maybe.
Did you go there for that reason?
Yeah, they offered us. The reason we went there, I was given a call to Baltimore, Maryland, in an inner city parish, Martin Luther Church in the heart of Baltimore. And we visited, and it was really going to be a tough parish. We'd live in a row house, we'd have 4 kids, and the neighborhood, we checked the schools. Principal of the school was a white principal. He says, if they wanted me to be honest with you, if I were you, I wouldn't send my kids to this school. It was not a good school, would have been hard. We'd have to send you to private school. And we chose not to go. But while we were there, we were near Washington, D.C. We just went over there for that chance and got a room at a hotel right next to this Capitol, U.S. Capitol. And when the moratorium was going on, how we got a room there, I don't know. So we marched in the moratorium parade, one of the largest demonstrations against the war. Richard Nixon was hiding in the White House there, and there were tanks and army troops surrounding us.
What was the crowd like?
Millions,
Was it
seemed
friendly,
like it.
or-
We want to be honest with you, we hung out at the Washington Memorial the night before. It was a really warm night. The smell of pot was so heavy in the air that everybody was getting high. We got out there, everybody's passing the stogies around. We fit in. We looked like hippies ourselves, I guess. Everybody but Bootz.
You didn't look like a hippie.
No nose.
But you were there in the middle of it, Bootz.
I know.
We got pictures to prove it. But so
Gotta find those
that was,
pictures.
we didn't know what we were going about. But then I went back, and then in 1970, in May, there was the Kent State shooting at Kent State, where the National Guard shot and killed several students there. And that upset the campuses all around the country, including the seminary campus. And I got a phone call that next summer. Mom got the phone call.
What year was that? What summer?
1970. It was later in the summer of 70. And the seminary was looking for somebody to help oversee the response to the national crisis. Just like the COVID thing now would be the crisis of our day. What's the church's response? So they put together an emergency committee of faculty members and got a $100,000 budget to do something, and they chose to hire a coordinator, and that was me. They didn't have enough money for a full-time position, but Bill Hume from the graduate program said, well, Bruce, if you come on board, you can become the associate director of the graduate program.
How old were you then?
I think it was 30. No, 69, 30, 31, because I was born in 39, so this is 1970. I was 31. That's where I met Tom Duke. He was the other young kid over there. We were both coming into an institution that was about as conservative and white and
Lutheran.
And Lutheran, yeah. And male. Everybody was married. There wasn't anybody who was divorced. It was very conservative, but good people there too. There were some who wanted to change. Students were pushing hard. A lot of them were there to dodge the draft. There were 280 entering class in the fall of 1970. That was before the draft was called up. When was the draft? When the draft numbers were drawn? I don't know when it was, but a lot of them had been there. But when the draft drawing happened, I can't remember the exact sequence here. A lot of people dropped out of the seminary because they weren't going to be drafted. Their number was low enough or high enough, is what you wanted. So we got involved over there more than I never dreamed I'd be on the seminary faculty. And I took the job and had a court of people that really steered us along. With Bill Hume, Lauren Halverson were the two main ones I worked with. Tom was filling in for a sabbatical for Bill Hume. He had been, and he was. Bill was back on the job again, after taking a year off to run the Ministry and Social Change program. And I became associate director of the Ministry and Social Change consortium program with 5 Twin Cities seminaries. So we were there. That job ended up turning into the contextual education program, which was overseeing the internship and also all learning by doing kind of field education things, all clinically related things to the educational program. That was news for the seminary. Medical schools had clinical things, and so was law, not as much as medical. Architecture had that. I mean, most professions have a clinical part. Nursing certainly has a clinical part of it. You learn by doing, and that was new for the seminary. And we ended up being involved with changes in the internship program. And we ended up starting a new department called the Contextual Education Department. And that was revolutionary, I'd say. That's where I met Dick Vangerud and Randy Nelson and myself. Luther and Northwestern Seminary combined to do this program jointly. We ended up getting quite an elaborate program. We got a lot of grant money, so we were kind of independent of the seminary as far as money sources, but certainly under the auspices of the president and the dean of the seminaries. Al Rognus was there when I started, and then later Lloyd Svensby came. I went through the big fight with the faculty. Some didn't like what we were doing, thought us as upstarts, and threatened to their stodgy ivory tower European-based study format for preparing students for ministry. They saw a lot of them more at the seminary, more a graduate school of religion or theology than it would be a training and professional training program for pastors. And there were no women at the seminary when I started. That changed, and we were there shortly. So we saw a lot of radical change. Women started coming, being ordained. Never saw any women on the faculty. That was one of the sore points for some of them, and I think kind of after a while, it wasn't an easy place. I had this tenure struggle. A seminary operates around the tenure system, from instructors to assistant professors to associates, tenure, and then full professors. And once you get tenure, you're kind of able to be there forever and never have to worry about being fired, like being on the Supreme Court, I guess. But I never did make it through the tenure process because the seminary faculty voted me. My colleagues voted it for me, but the president, Lloyd Svensby, vetoed it. And that was another change place, and changed the seminary too. Lloyd Svensby eventually ended up leaving. I left, went over to 1981. I left the seminary and went into clinical pastoral education at Metropolitan Medical Center, and then I eventually was certified as an acting supervisor. I never did complete the whole process to become a full supervisor. Never got through that. That's a long story. And eventually, in about that whole CPE thing, that should be interesting, because I ended up, MMC is physically connected to Hennepin County Medical Center. And by then, you can tell the story about Bootz had become a nurse practitioner. That happened simultaneous to my being at the seminary. That whole thing started about 1975, 76. She ended up becoming the second class of nurse practitioners to graduate from the University of Minnesota nurse practitioner program. Looking for themes in our relationship, in our history, I always, looking back, think that we were pioneers. We were not settlers. We did not pick up brothers had plowed the ground. We went and plowed the ground. you did, and me and myself as well. Whole contextualizer thing was never done. Being at an all-black congregation and the Ministry and Social Change program, that was new. Being a Lutheran and being white, that was new. Being on the seminary faculty, trying to challenge the whole philosophy of how to train pastors. She cut new ground, and I was so proud of her. Hennepin County Medical Center, she went to medical school. In the first year or two of her coming there, they wanted her credentials as nurse practitioner, but they wanted her trained in neurology. So she took medical school classes with the medical students in neurology and neurophysiology, and she had to train the doctors too. It was new for them. They had never worked with nurse practitioners before.
What year is this?
Well, you started that program. I think you left the program, the Swanage Point Clinic, about 1975, 76. Then you went to Bridgeway, and then you ended up going to the hospital, Hennepin County, late 70s, 78, 79, somewhere in there. And then fun for me, I ended up going to Hennepin County Medical Center eventually after training at MMC. Longer story, I went along the way. I was a supervisor in clinical pastoral education. Ebenezer Caroline Center, where we had the first AIDS patients. Mom was working, you were working at Hennepin in the neurology department and the closed head injuries and some of those neurological problems, and we had the same patients over at the Caroline Center. She'd come over there after work, and we'd sometimes do a group together, support group. These closed head people couldn't remember anything, but the young people have been hurt, and so we got a chance to work together on things, and that was exciting. We also got into the program in human sexuality, which was an experimental program for the medical school and the seminary, training pastors and doctors to be less intimidated by sexual issues. And that was a real pioneering program. I think they quit doing it. It's too bad. But it paved the way, I think, for a lot of things, like the acceptance of gays and lesbians in the mainstream church and medical practice. By then, Sue-Ann, our daughter Sue-Ann, graduated from nursing at St. Olaf. Her first job was at Hennepin County Medical Center, and she went to the the surgical unit. And Mom was in neurology, and I was the chaplain. So here we were, all in the same place. It's kind of fun. We spent a couple of years there. We used to ride our bicycles to work together. It was fun. She'd come look for me at the end of the day, or I'd go looking for her. We'd hear each other over the loudspeaker once in a while. Mom was becoming a nurse practitioner, and she finished that program over at Swanage Point Clinic, and then at the end of it they fired her because she kind of outgrew the place. But the best thing that ever happened for you to move on, you about tripled your income when you moved on. She moved first to Bridgeway, and then you moved from Bridgeway over to Hennepin County Medical Center.
And what was Bridgeway? What was it? A clinic or?
Tell us
It's outpatient clinic.
Well, Bridgeway was the senior, kind of a nursing home, but specializing in two of the floors were in alcoholics, or in mental illness. So not many places would take people with mental illness and chemical dependency, and you guys took them. And then on top of that, because of her connections, they also took Huntington's disease patients over there.
Oh, and that's where she started getting her.
I think that's where you first
connections.
connected with Huntington's disease, was there.
Yeah. But there was also outpatients.
Yeah. But mostly, what we mean by that, they did live there. That wasn't somebody from the community.
So they were residential.
It was right on end of Lake Street on the east side, still in Minneapolis. We like to meet her afterwards, and we would, after work, I'd come over from Luther Seminary, and she would, we'd go walking or running. Back then we could run. We went down the East River Road to Lake Street, crossed over and went up the West River Road to Franklin, and across the bridge, and that was our route. We would do that several times, and she met some good friends while she was there. Marilyn was one of your good friends. But then you went from there over to Hennepin County Medical Center Neurology Clinic, and the connections, I'm not sure how it happened, but people in your program, it was the nurse practitioner program had only about 10 or 12 women in it, and they looked out for each other because they were second class coming out of the university, and they really looked after each other. And I think it's word of mouth. Guillermo's were friends with Ettinger's or something like that, and he was the chief of neurology at Hennepin. And because she knew nothing about neurology, they sent her to University of Minnesota Medical School to take courses in neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. And she took classes right alongside the med students.
Mom, do you remember how it felt to take on that new job with those new responsibilities?
I was thrilled. I loved it.
Was
And I
it
did
scary?
a good job.
It seems like a scary thing to undertake.
Yeah, I
She
was.
held her own with those med students, I tell you.
Wow.
Yeah. I really loved every day. Yep.
Wow, that's great.
And then she went to work and got her pin that says nurse practitioner. She said she was a little nervous because they would, patients for general neurology clinic would line up, and there were about 8 neurologists in the clinic, and for some general clinics there would be a bunch of them, and then the next patient would go online, she'd see them, and she'd see just the same ones that the regular neurologist, so she was a little intimidated, I think, too, but she did a good job, and she had any problems, they had backup with the neurologist. And her good friend Barb Patrick was the only female neurologist there. They are friends to this day. So they were glad to have each other. And somewhere along in there, I ended up coming over there as chaplain. So that's how I know all these things because after I left the seminary, I went to CPE at Hennepin. I went to CPE at MMC. And she was right next door, and we connected up over there, and then I ended up, long story short, I was over at Hennepin too. So we got to work together. It was fun. We got to walk, or we rode our bikes in the summertime. To work from northeast Minneapolis down to Hennepin, and fun. We rode bikes back home. It was really fun. We enjoyed working together. We didn't see each other all day long, but at the end of the day, we'd hook up again. That was a fun time. And then I was trying to get certified as a CPE supervisor. I was an acting supervisor, but I hadn't met the final level yet. So kept working away. You could function the same as a regular supervisor, but you didn't have the word, you had the word acting in front of your certification instead of just leaving that word off. But I stayed there until, trying to get this right, 1989 is when I left. I think here's the way it worked. Yeah, I left Hennepin. Well, I left out a couple of places in between the seminary and Hennepin, and that would be I ended up at Ebenezer Caroline Center for 3 years, and Methodist Hospital, St. Louis Park. I was filled in out there for the supervisor who had left. I was there for 6 months, and I was supervisor at Hennepin County's home school for delinquents, teenagers. That was a fun job. All along the way we shared a lot of things together. It was fun. And then I ended up at Caroline Center. We had the first AIDS patients, the AIDS epidemic. You were seeing some of the same patients over at Hennepin. We'd end up... Caroline Center was the old Abbott Hospital, but that was in 1986.
And tell me about your experience with the AIDS patients.
I can't remember the dates here for sure. I think it was about 1986 that we started getting AIDS patients. And we had several very sick people. And we didn't know much about the disease. You didn't know much. You were frightened over at the neurology clinic too. You didn't want to get stuck with a needle. And you did one time. You had to report it, and you were kind of sick about it but she didn't get it. A lot of our fears were, I think, overly cautious, and we were overly cautious. But we learned that it's not easily contagious. So that was an interesting chapter, and we worked. Sometimes we had head-injured young adults that were at Caroline Center, and we had a support group for them, or I don't know if it was a support group, just letting them talk about it. Head-injured people that were all over the place, didn't know what you were dealing with. Mom would sometimes sit with me in that group too. We had a lot of good times together, and we would do Sunday services over there. Christmas Eve, we did Christmas Eve. We had, you guys even remember going with us?
I remember that.
We'd have services over there.
Yeah.
There, meet some interesting characters. Well, we got involved in doing interesting things in homeschool for boys too, and we had lots of fun working with the family. And then moving along, I think I ended up going to Zion in 1989. And Zion was in a tough neighborhood in South Minneapolis. At the time, it was considered the highest crime rate neighborhood in the city, highest murder rate, bounded by I-35W and Lyndale Avenue to the west, and from Lake Street down to 36th Street on the south. And Zion was the only really mainline church, and we were smack dab in the middle of that neighborhood. And we lived in the neighborhood. That was one of the requirements.
Why did you become a parish pastor again?
I got tired of CPE and the certification process. To become full supervisor, I was getting guff from presenting my semesters, and they didn't like what I was doing. That's I found I was just knocking my head against the wall. I think I went up to that committee 3 times, and they all sent back contradictory suggestions. One was that I needed more experience with diverse groups, and then I hear my group was too diverse, and then I say, well, that kind of stuff. Actually, I was just about had it with that whole process, and gladly left to go over to Zion, which was kind of the culmination for me of the whole career of being a parish pastor, being a professor at the seminary, being a chaplain and CPE supervisor. Went over to Zion, and we kind of did all those things together. Really fun. Challenging neighborhood. We were there 11 years. We started off living there right behind White Castle on Lake Street. And Lake Street, we could walk 3 blocks down to the church. Mom would see some of the same patients she saw in their clinic, epilepsy patients or head-injured patients or what have you, and then they'd come to church and we'd see them there too. So it was fun. Never felt you were out of a job, you were on all the time. everywhere you went. But I think we made a big difference to Zion, and this is a thriving congregation to this day. Small parish. We ended up starting a program there for a welfare to work for single parents of kids who were homeless, or people who were homeless. And saw a place called Zoom House. Zoom, Zion originated outreach ministry, not the Zoom program we all look on as our group meetings now. We're in stay-at-home mode.
What was the impetus for starting that program?
Well, next door to the church was an apartment building, which was probably had more 911 calls to it than any other building in the whole neighborhood. And it was troublesome. When I was there, we remember there was gunfights breaking out in the parking lot of Zion, which stood between the two buildings. And people were getting mugged. Our president of the congregation got mugged in the middle of the day. We saw the guy who was crawling in the window over at the apartment building, and president of the congregation, Nidra, said, "Hey, that's the guy that just mugged me." And I said, so we called the cops, and we called 911 all the time down at Zion. We did, when we lived in that place behind White Castle, like we called 911 about every month. At least there was some kind of excitement. Jill, you went and lived there with us for a while. She was broken. She did not want to leave her house in Northeast.
Oh,
But that was when she just finishing up at Concordia.
yeah, I was still a student there.
Yeah.
And you guys had a view out your sliding door of that apartment you lived in, of a dumpster, and you would just watch people throw other people into the dumpster. And
Yep.
Remember that?
I'd see my dumpster lid being lit up by the community, and out crawled at least one or two people out of the dumpster.
She was going to call the police and tell them there's somebody's body dumped in a dumpster, and then she saw them crawling out. Yep, I think they're getting out, he said. I don't know if the police came or not. If you want to get rid of anything, set it out on your patio and it'll be stolen before the day was over with. We didn't need to bring anything to the second-hand store.
How long did you live in that apartment?
Well, we lived there until we convinced them that we didn't need to live in the neighborhood. I think they started feeling sorry for us. So we ended up moving back to our house northeast until we decided to sell that house. Our house we've been in since we moved to Minneapolis way back in the 1960s, and sold it to Sue Ann. And then we moved up to New Brighton on Mississippi Circle on Rice Creek. That's where we're sitting right now. We always felt kind of guilty leaving the city. I always felt like we were on vacation here and we needed to go home. Someday we were going to have to go back home. We weren't sure where home was, but we loved it here. And we planned moving here. Our idea was to find a house we wouldn't have to move because we're getting closer to retirement. We wouldn't have to move again. And we found this beautiful place. We think God found it for us, so felt like by chance we found there's no for sale sign on the house. That's happened to us several times that there were no for sale signs, but we've heard about it. And the woman whose parents lived 2 doors north of us, up across the street, told her about it being for sale. And so we ended up making an offer on it, and we got it. And we've been happy here ever since. But then we had to drive into Zion, which felt like Zion was a drama after drama movie set that we drove onto every morning, and at night I'd get in my car and drive off the movie set and drive home until the next morning we'd enter the drama again. There was a lot of excitement.
Yeah, what was some drama you experienced when you were there?
Well, I suppose first thing was all the murders. We had like my first year there, I think we had like 10 or 12 murders in the neighborhood, 54 square blocks. And that was, each one of them brought a little excitement to it. But nobody I knew, but taxi cab driver got murdered there, and then the neighbors were leaving. One thing everybody had in common in the neighborhood, they all wanted to get out. The prices of homes were really plummeting. You could buy a nice house there for $25,000-$30,000. Apartment building that was causing all the trouble over there. We made an offer, the church made an offer to buy it for, I think it was $600,000 for a 22-unit building. When we ended up getting it. So the drama of getting rid of all the bums that were living in there, the no goods who had contracts for leases, getting them out of there. We started a nonprofit called Zoom, and we ended up getting suburban partnerships. We got grants from the government, HUD, State Department of Housing. We got a lot of volunteers fixing up the building. We got programs, and we hired staff. We ended up operating quite a big program, and it's still operating to this day. But I'm glad we made the move. It was a little inconvenient to drive so far, but we loved it here. And we sold the house at Northeast to Sue Ann. She's fixed it up beautifully. Northeast has since then become the place to go. That house is more valuable than this house. Who would ever guess that? Northeast has become the place to move. Sue Ann has done a good job there. We've retired. We left Zion.
What did you do after you retired?
Which retirement? That's the question.
First one.
I guess Zion would be the first retirement. Yeah. Mom was working full-time still at Hennepin County Medical Center at the neurology clinic. And then 2000 I retired. I remember turning it over to my friend, mentee, Jason Van Hunnick, who was our intern. He'd been with me for 4 years of seminary. We did a lot of work with the seminary when I was there too. We had a lot of students. We actually kind of ran a clinical pastoral education program of our own there the whole time. Jason took over in the afternoon, and then we had another student I've had before, Alexandra George, came too, so they had 2 pastors to replace me. I always said they took 2 people to fill my shoes. They all laughed, everybody laughed about that. And we ended up coming up here. And Bootz is very active at Zion. She loved it over there. And she wanted to retire. She was getting close to 65. And she was on soft money doing research on Huntington's. And the year she was turning 65, she called me one day and said, we're kind of getting short on our grant money here. And there's an opportunity I could offer to retire early and help us out. And I said, grab it. Well, she was retired about 3 months early, I think. But she was 65, and she retired in 2005. And 2006, we moved to, had an opportunity to move to Bali, Indonesia. So we moved to Bali. I was a volunteer pastor at International Church in Bali. We were there for 4 months. That was fun for all of us. Bootz especially, she wanted to go there more than anybody because she was tired after working 25 years at Hennepin County. She sat at the swimming pool all day long. She had a chauffeur and a gardener and a cook and didn't have to do anything. So she laid around. That was a good time for you, right? And she interacted and was everybody loved her. To this day, they still love her over there in Indonesia. They loved me too, but they loved her more. And she was a sweetheart. We got to visit around the islands there. We got to visit Timor. We got to visit Kalimantan. Saw the orangutans. We got involved with getting water to a village that had no electricity. Figured out how to get the water system hooked up. We didn't do any of that stuff, but we did the blessings. We would go over there. To this day, we're still connected with the Bali people and the Timor people. Then after that, I came back and I had a chance to go to Westwood. Meanwhile, I had also been a chance, 2001 happened. That's when I was at the north side of Minneapolis, merging 5 congregations into one that was Bethlehem. Bethlehem Lutheran, St. Petri, Bethel, and the Zion North. I was at Zion North, and we ended up trying to consolidate. Only 2 of the congregations actually went along with it, formed a new congregation called River of Life, which I think is still going over there. There are too many churches on the north side. I did that job part-time, had my friend Harry Jensen helping me in terms of buying property, selling property for the house, for the churches we had. And we had our friend Bob Nervig, where we met. He ended up being interim pastor of the new church we called River of Life. So I quit when he became the interim pastor and getting it going, and I went right away to Westwood shortly thereafter. And became, that's when I went to Scandia. And I first went to Scandia with Scott. Scott was associate pastor at Scandia and came up there in the late 90s sometime. And the senior pastor retired, and Scott was called to be the senior pastor. So they needed an interim pastor, associate pastor, till they could get one. And he asked me if I was interested in it. And I said, not full-time. I think it wasn't full-time. He offered half-time, and that was just fine with me. So we had 6 months up there with Scott at Scandia. He was the senior pastor, I was associate. People loved going to church and see how father and son interacted. I kept waiting for him to tell me what to do. He had his opportunity. We had lots of fun together, and I met lots of people up there. You did too. We made good friends. So we got friends all over the world and all over this city. We ended up, after going up there, going to Westwood. And that was about 2000. I can't get the sequence of this right. Anyway, I think it was after we went to Bali, we went to Westwood. Because we were in Bali in 2006. I don't know if I get the sequence. So we ended up...
I think you left Zion. I remember you left Zion when
2000.
Liam was 3 years old. Annika was a baby, so 2000, before Peter was born.
Yeah. And then from Zion, we left Zion, we went... I think that's when I went to Zion North first. Because I was at Zion North when 911 happened. And then the first anniversary of 911, I know I was at Scott's place. Interesting how 911 becomes a pivotal point for figuring out where you were when that happened. I think so. Anyway, I was at Westwood. My friend Jason had left Zion by then and become associate pastor with Tanya Haber at Westwood, and they were looking for a third member of their team. It's a big suburban congregation, and I had given up on everything as far as working. I was up at our cabin having fun, and Jason found me up there and said, "Hey, Westphal, you want to join us? We need another pastor here." I said, "You got to be kidding." So the long and the short of that one is I ended up going on at the Westwood staff. It was Jason, Tanya, and myself. For 7 years we were there. Wonderful people, wonderful time. I think best team I've ever been on. Very successful place, still is to this day. I think it's some of the happiest time because I didn't work full time. I was half time. And general pastoring, I was called a pastor for older adults. And lots of older adults there. We made friends there that to this day too. And then lo and behold, Nervig ends up quitting, and then on the north side and coming, he joined the Westwood too, so we had Nervig with us. It was just a wonderful bunch of people.
Was he on staff too? Never
No.
was he just a member?
He was sat in our weekly text study with all the pastors. He enjoyed that. He loved being at the heart of it all. But we did so many things together. We traveled with him to Bali one time, well, not Bali, to Hawaii. Went to Branson with him. We brought some other people with us when we did that. That was fun.
Tell me about you went to South Africa. I remember it was 1996.
Yeah, that was back when Nelson Mandela took over as president, got out of prison, and we were looking for opportunities to connect the Lindale neighborhood black population and churches to opportunities in South Africa.
You didn't talk too much about the cabin.
No, that's a big part of overlay the whole thing.
Yeah.
We had lots of things happen up there. Church youth groups, CPE groups would go up there.
Yeah.
We had Indians up there for we didn't talk about the Indian thing either.
No, I think we can talk
We
about
didn't
that.
talk about
Right, that was a CPE group you had.
remember the Indian? You were with us,
Yeah,
and
went
that
to
was quite an
Mexico.
experience.
Sweat lodging.
You guys don't forget that.
No.
Remember the Indian group? How old were you when we went to the
I was
Indian?
I missed the first couple days of 9th grade to go on that trip.
Well, you got a cross-cultural experience with genuine Indians.
Yeah. That was good.
Remember out in the desert in the sweat lodge?
Yeah. I didn't do the sweat lodge, but
Hey, yeah, Pig Nation. I just, I don't know what Pig Nation was. Big word. I can know what it means.
yeah.